the pinch of the debt burden has come to be felt by the common mwananchi. Now, to look at this, I'm joined by a mind passionate and committed to advancing local development, Dr. Abraham Rugo Murio. He's currently the country manager and executive director of the International Budget Partnership Kenya. And of note as well, he is a retired vice president of Kenyatta University. Welcome on set, Dr. Rugo.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see you and to meet you.
How is your Mashujaa Day panning out?
No, it's good. It's been a good day spent with family. And just thinking about how can we create the next Mashujaas for this country. Yes.
And looking on those matters of Mashujaas, we can see, like, if you were to try and even envision what let's say the independence fighters were actually gauging for. Yeah. They wanted freedom in every aspect.
Correct.
And somehow, even within the Holy Book, they say the slave, the borrower is the slave of the lender. Now, looking at Kenya currently, the debt burden, 55% of the GDP is the advisable link concerning we should be sailing around there.
Yeah.
Currently, we are at 64.2%. And bear in mind, there has been a prediction that probably by the end of 2022, we'll have hit 70%. Daktari, how in the red are we concerning our public debt?
I think it's significant, and we are, I think, in the red of the reds, because, when we think about public debt, and I think it's important for us to bring this down, when even you think about, so debt is the loans, is the amount that the government is owed for purposes, for what it has borrowed for purposes of development. And how do we know that, you are on the red even at a personal level? You're on the red if, at least for me, three things are not adding up. One is that you are spending far much more of your income in trying to service your debt. So in the current case, we are spending about 66 shillings out of every 100 shillings that we raise of our income on servicing debt. In other words, we only have about 35 shillings for purposes of everything else. The second one is when the investments that you have spent your money on are not necessarily clear or not showing any return. So you may have just partied all your money, and I mean, nothing wrong if that was your plan, but definitely it does not give you a return on investment. And there is a struggle in trying to understand particularly all the money that we have spent from proceeds of public debt, whether you think about the money like we've spent on Kenya Airways, on state-owned corporations, on different projects of roads, and infrastructure, in water. What exactly, the return on investment is still not clear. And thirdly, is when with all those factors being the economy is not necessarily growing, the revenues that you're making are not necessarily growing, so that then you can assure yourself to be able to provide other services as you continue, because that is not the only thing. So that is not a service per se. It's not healthcare, it's not agriculture, it's not water services. So especially on the second point, when you look at how much we are exporting vis-a-vis how much foreign exchange we are spending in terms of servicing debt. Again, so we are literally on the red, and I think the president has been on record saying we are doing badly. There's been enough messages coming through. And I'm one of the people who believe strongly that where we are right now, we are out of our sustainability because of the measures I've just talked about.
Okay, now, for every 100 shillings we earn, 66 is going to debt.
Debt repayment.
Debt repayment.
Correct.
Now, looking at the fact that recently Treasury was very, very outspoken in saying that we have not defaulted in paying our premiums to the ones who we owe. Looking at the fact that this is 65 that is going back to pay debt, which means we leave around only 35% to do anything, yet we have not really even allowed ourselves to look at even the government spending as a whole.
Yeah.
Now, is it like a time we also sought to even look for a way of maybe reorganizing or restructuring our loans with these lenders, or even come to maybe even rough decisions like, can't pay, won't pay?
No, I don't think we have the option of can't pay, won't pay, because what that does is that it sends a distress message to the economic, to the world market. Remember that our debt is in largely three categories. So the first category is that you have domestic debt. This is money that we borrow locally, and that accounts for about 50%. But in terms of repayment risk, no fear of default, it's the largest, because we, for instance, just this year alone, we are likely to spend about 550 or thereabout billion of the 1.3 trillion that we'll spend, which is a significant amount on interest payment to domestic debt alone. So that's domestic debt. Then the second one is that you have external commercial debt. This is debt that we have taken, for instance, the infrastructure bonds, the Euro bonds. This is money that basically we have borrowed from commercial lenders out there. And then thirdly is what we call the multilateral and bilateral kind of arrangements, money that we have borrowed from institutions, financial institutions, and government to government. Now, when you look across, the first two categories are the categories that are almost commercial. They are commercial in nature because, for instance, the domestic debt is issued through, commercial papers, treasury bills and treasury bonds for that purpose. The second category, again, as I have explained, these are commercial. They are high interest, almost, the type of unsecured kind of loans, as one would say. And then you have the last one. The last one perhaps is the easiest to negotiate a restructuring, the bilateral, but it forms currently the smallest portion of our debt. The biggest portion, about 50%, is domestic debt. Then you have another significant amount that is commercial external in nature, and then you have the multilateral and the bilaterals, as I've said. So I don't think we have an option of saying we will not pay, because that sends the wrong message, because we still need resources. Mm-hmm. But it is time to rethink and to reorganize, particularly how do we renegotiate, for instance, longer repayment periods, and then so that then we can pay smaller premiums, installments, as it were. For instance, this year alone, let me just give you an example. This year alone, we are going to spend about 1.3 trillion of the about 2.1 trillion that we will collect in revenues. What does that exactly mean? It simply means that if, with an income of about 210 Kenya shillings, 130 of that will go into debt repayment. So the negotiation can be, can we reduce this portion but then pay it over a longer period? What happens is that then you end up paying more, but you pay in installments that are manageable. And the reason why you need that desperately is because when you look at the Kenya Kwanza manifesto and the promises that they have made for different sectors, the 35 shillings that is left is not even enough. And we did this calculation at the International Budget Partnership, that once you remove debt and statutory obligations, which basically is, pensions, because that's another big conversation I think this country needs to have, and constitutional offices, then you remove the money you are going to send to counties, then you remove internal security, you remove teachers, just the component of teachers, which comes to about 270, 280 billion. You actually are already on the red. You have not paid salaries for any other sector. You already you've already cleared your income. And that's why I'm saying it is critical that discussion starts happening now, but knowing very well that any restructuring conversation is in and of itself a default of sorts, because you're saying I am not able to honor my commitment as per the agreement I made earlier, and therefore I'm requesting to pull it out. We had a window in 2021 when there was a window basically to renegotiate some but that window closed, and also because of the nature of us being a middle low income country, then it means there are certain privileges. This is difficult to say, but there are certain privileges that we don't enjoy that are enjoyed by poorer countries. So Kenya is no longer in that space. But this is a long answer of saying that conversation has to be held now, because then there is no other way to free resources. The other option, of course, the other alternatives, the other option is to raise taxes and start charging more taxes, raise more taxes. Already we are doing that. I don't think there is. The measure in which you can push that again further. And the third option is the difficult one, is to actually delay service provision, is to delay projects, is to delay certain programs that need to be done. So that's a long answer to say the options are not necessarily black and white. They're not as straightforward. It's a negotiation, it's a give and take, it's trade-offs.
And looking at the fact that we borrow money, you'll clarify this to me, but I believe we borrow in dollars or rather foreign currency.
Correct.
So it means we are subject to fluctuations in the international market.
Correct. So as I've said, it's important for me to clarify that 50% of our debt is in Kenya shillings because it's domestic. However, the highest percentage of the external borrowing is in US dollar. So in the last just about 4 or 5 months, our dollar equivalent, and of course it's followed by the euro, then by the pound, and I think then the Chinese currency, and I think Japanese yuan at the end. What that means is that with the fluctuation of just the dollar moving from 115 shillings, I think 113 shillings, 115 shillings, to currently 119, our debt already shot by 300 billion. Because that is the amount that we have in dollar form. So first of all, we are subject, of course, we are affected but we are affected in another way again, is that because of that, it means that we have a shortage of especially when we have less export than imports. In other words, we are not making more foreign currency in. It means we have to spend more Kenya shilling buying the dollar at a more expensive rate. So it's almost becoming a loss in that sense, and therefore servicing becomes very difficult because then it means that your foreign exchange is already there's a shortage. Remember, that's the same one you use to export fuel, the same one you use to buy a lot of the other products. That we import. So that's the current picture in terms of currency.
And it is not a picture that is one that is very attractive. Rather, it's a worrying picture. And I'm going to ask you this now: what are the possible alternatives? Because we still need to meet our needs as a country, however much we're servicing these debts. Even if we were maybe to be able to secure longer periods to be able to repay the debts, we still have to run the country. The country still has to move on. What are the alternatives that are possible? Maybe they can be implemented even by the government that is currently in office to be able to ensure that we move smoothly, we don't incur even more debts rather, or will we just have to go to borrow to survive while we are still paying the other debt that we have?
Thank you so much. I think first of all, I think it is important for us to dissuade ourselves from the assumption that our biggest problem is a shortage of cash. So I don't think our problem is that we have a shortage of cash. I think we are dealing with other problems that are not necessarily a shortfall per se. We are dealing with problems of theft of public funds. We are dealing with a problem of lack of accountability. We are dealing with a problem of lack of rule of law, our values that it define and inform, a critical discussion about even our own approach to development. And therefore, because when you have listened to the speeches even of the former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, there was a figure that kept moving around, which I was quite curious, a figure of about 2 billion per day. If you just take with me some quick calculation, if you take, we lose 2 billion a day, let's assume that is equivalent to 2 shillings per day. If you multiply that by 365, it gives you a rough figure of about 730 Kenya shillings, which is about 730 billion. Now, 730 billion, if you take the deficit of this current financial year is about 862 billion shillings, or rather 800, and if you again I use simple maths of 862 shillings. What that tells you is that the amount we lose is equivalent to the amount we are planning to borrow, because that is what deficit is all about. Now, I don't know how much of that 2 billion, if you went back, we had been losing. So if you're assuming every year of Jubilee you lost a similar amount, you're saying you lost almost 7 trillion. and you have borrowed just about 9 trillion. It's interesting math if you do it.
And it's also worrying because you say 7 trillion. If you were to calculate that between the time the regime came into power and to this moment, the current debt is currently at 8.64.
It's about 9 trillion almost.
Yeah, it's actually 1.6 away from that level.
So what I'm saying is, we are not dealing with a technical problem per se of how much money we need to spend and how much money we need to borrow. That's not necessarily the issue. Is that you are dealing with other externalities about the governance framework, the value system, the accountability structure within which this money is being spent. Because it does not matter. You can borrow as much as you want, but if, the example of a leaking jerrycan, you can run to the, to fetch the water, you can run back, but as long as your jerrycan is still leaking, it doesn't matter how fast you run, and how harder you work. We can even increase our tax level, but if a lot of it is still going to be, it's going to pilfer, it's going to be lost. So unless we address the accountability problem, I feel that we are just going to be doing round, and circles. That's one. The second one is that indeed there's need to rationalize public expenditure. They call it the whole process around fiscal consolidation. That's the word we use. That's a simple language. That is just a big word that simply means that we need to rationalize how we spend. Are we spending money for the rightful functions at the national level? Are we spending for the rightful functions at the county level? Or are we duplicating? The state-owned corporations, which spend about a third of our budget and also account for a significant amount of the money that is public guaranteed debt, whether you think about Kenya Pipeline, whether you think about Kenya Ports Authority, or whether you think about all these state-owned corporations, are they fit for purpose? And are they efficacy? Already today there's been a discussion even about what to do with Kenya Airways, because every year we are bailing it out with billions of shillings. But that's just one example. So unless we work out the efficiency, we work out that we are spending for the rightful purposes, and what that does is that then it starts to show that perhaps our deficit is not the actual deficit. Perhaps the deficit is much more, because then the projects could be rationalized a bit more. Because I don't think it is possible for us to achieve the kind of development we want without a form of borrowing. Other countries also do borrow. But unless you address the rule of law, the efficiency, because in fact if you follow some of the stories around some of the money that has been borrowed, some of it even never got to the country. It got lost somewhere along the way. So for me, I think the conversation is beyond just the numbers. The numbers can easily be balanced, and anybody you talk to can easily tell you. Perhaps we can. But if we have we already have a values problem, an accountability challenge about how we are going about these things, then it means that even if you today reduced the borrowing to a bare minimum, and you still are losing the kind of amount you're talking. 730 billion is almost equivalent to about 25%, a quarter of the budget every year. So for me, I see the solution not being just reduce the deficit, but we need to address these other very significant issues.
Okay, Dr. As we finalize, because you're being beaten by time, I'd like to know, on the public sphere, there's some very intimidating jargon in the economic sphere that the common mwananchi is like, wachia hawa watu wafanye hiyo hesabu. Something that they are rather not concerned about. Talking about now, coming back to your organization, of which you are the country manager currently, the International Budget Partnership Kenya. Now, among the things that I noted about the organization is that it's very, very key in ensuring there is a participation between the common mwananchi and the ruling class, and to be able to merge a difference and be able to even keep the mwananchi on toes on understanding what is happening on the public finance sphere. Tell me about this whole initiative and everything that you're doing to ensure the common mwananchi understands what is happening, so that next time we hear 2 billion is being lost, it's something to be concerned about, because when that report did come about, it just passed like the wind. We had it, shock and awe, then it was done.
Yeah, I think first of all, I think it's important for me to emphasize that every Kenyan can participate in matters budgets. Budgets are not complicated issues because budgets are about the priorities that a society chooses to spend its money and its resources on. I think it's important for us to also recall, whether borrowed or whether through taxation, every single shilling, every single cent that the Kenya government spends is your taxes. It is either your taxes now, and for instance, even as I speak, if you pulled out your token bill, if you've bought your tokens from Kenya Power anytime in the recent past, and looked just at all the items charged there, you realize that more rates, more taxes are actually being charged than the service you're buying called electricity. That's just an example. In other words, debt is future tax. So you're either ensuring your current tax is spent properly, or your future tax is spent properly. So our job is to basically make sure that materials around budgets are simplified. They are made accessible to the people. But I think there is a call that we have made making, and I will make it even here, that all of us need to bother ourselves with how resources are being spent where we are. Resources around, for instance, there's a dispensary that is closest to you. Is it functioning properly? Do you know whether it has been allocated resources? Those are county function. The school where you take your children, the road that you use, all this is public information. In other words, we cannot fake ignorance for our lack of participation. And therefore, for us, we come from the point of belief that every Kenyan has the ability, has the possibility to be able to engage in budgets, and with the interest, then ours and many other organizations is to try and provide opportunities. When public participation is called, I know it's very easy to just say, no, nobody listens, nobody cares, but the truth is, at the end of the day, if you and myself and somebody else and 2, 3, 10, 15, 20, 30 Kenyans in every ward, in every village, woke up and said, we want to know how money is being spent in this ward. Those are even votes if you are to think about how politicians think. They will be able to action on that. And therefore, public participation is not only a constitutional provision, but it's something that we must claim for ourselves, as sovereign citizens of this republic. And be able to ask questions, because when more and more of us ask questions, then somebody is compelled to answer them. When more and more of us keep quiet, then it is assumed all is well and all is fine, and therefore, so that's the job we do at the International Budget Partnership Kenya, and we continue, and our website has quite a lot of materials around that, but we are also working to build an army of budget champions, of budget facilitators across the country, so that then we can support communities and people who want to participate and to be involved in these spaces. Yeah.
Well, that's all we have time for right now, and I'm grateful to you, Dr. Abraham, for coming up and actually being able to bring us up to speed concerning the matters on the public debt and the necessity for us to have an inclusive approach. We have an accountability as taxpayers to participate and to be part of the whole